I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. Let's talk about the dangerous and disqualifying messages that Donald Trump posted on Tuesday, the same day the House Ways and Means Committee voted to publicly release his tax returns and his corporate tax returns to the public. These statements that Donald Trump posted further perpetuate the insurrection, his desire to continue to try to overthrow our democracy. He threatens Jack Smith, the special counsel investigating him for criminal conduct in connection with the January 6th insurrection and for stealing top secret government records and thousands of other government records. Here, let us take a look at the statements that Donald Trump made that just demonstrate how depraved the MAGA Republican Party is to be led by such a disgusting and despicable person. Donald Trump writes, "So when looking at and reviewing my previous truth, all in caps, about the U.S. government's FBI suppression of Hunter Biden's crazed and damning laptop, which information, if allowed to be revealed, would have alone, without even counting the many other forms of cheating by the Democrats that took place, changed the election result by millions and millions of votes in favor of the Republicans. And me, why didn't the Unselect Committee report on the rigged and stolen election? The reason for the protest," that's all in caps, and a question mark. Oh, where do we start here? How about we start with the fact that you were given an opportunity to speak before the January 6th committee, and like the coward that you are, you ran and filed a lawsuit in Florida to block your testimony before the January 6th committee because your preference is to just spread these conspiracies and lies on your social media platforms rather than confront the truth. You are a complete and utter coward. Hey, look, even when New York Attorney General Letitia James called you in, asked you the most basic questions in New York in connection with the special proceeding that predated her filing of the fraud lawsuit, which is absolutely going to shut down your business in October, you were asked the most basic questions. What's the valuation of this property? What's the valuation of that property? What's the valuation of this property? What's the appraised value of this property? What's the appraised value of that property? And you sat there like the little coward that you are and said, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, because that's what you do. And that's after you tried to avoid your deposition and filed everything to try to not sit in front of New York Attorney General Letitia James. I suppose that we could go on and say that everything you spread here is a complete conspiracy. That would be too easy. How about we talk about the fact that when you talk about the FBI in October of 2020, Christopher Wray is the person that you appointed. Christopher Wray is a Republican. Bill Barr is a Republican. A lot of the other people essentially all of the other people who you and other right-wing extremists now, like Elon Musk and other people who you talk about in the Twitter files, those are your political appointees. These are all people who you appointed, who you now claim to be Democrats because they didn't go along with your most deranged of conspiracies, with your the most dangerous of your conspiracies. They were willing to go pretty far for you to try to harm and, in fact, undermine our democracy. They just wouldn't go full-fledged conspiratorial QAnon cultist, and because they wouldn't, you now call them Democrats or you call them rhinos. These are people who you employed. These are people who you nominated. These are people who you appointed. And then when you go and you talk about, oh, now you blame Twitter. You believe you lost the election because of Twitter. It makes absolutely no sense at all. Complete deranged nonsense here. Then you go on to say on Tuesday, the so-called deep state, often referred to by many other names, including cheaters, insurrectionists, communists, and yes, even our good old rhinos, have been working on sinister and evil plots for a long time, even well before I came to office. They are long-seated swamp creatures and are bad news for the USA. Remember very early on when Obama, Biden, Holder, and Comey were, this is all in caps, spying on my campaign? I wonder if their hand-picked special prosecutor, put that in quotes, Jack Smith, knew what was going on. Okay, so here attacking the special counsel, Jack Smith, calling him a prosecutor and putting that in quotes, the person engaged in the criminal investigation into your theft of government records, as well as your conduct on the January 6th insurrection, again, threatening the prosecutor, which is of itself a crime. Then referring to insurrectionists, communists, rhinos. I mean, the level of projection here is absurd. I mean, you're calling who? Who are you calling insurrectionists? You are the insurrectionist here. You want to talk, you don't even know what a communist is. I know that that's what Republicans like to do because you absolutely have no ideas whatsoever other than hate for hate's sake and power for power's sake, but don't give a crap about actually the American people. You don't talk about things like education. You don't talk about things like healthcare. You don't talk about things like infrastructure. You don't talk about things like working conditions. You're against real freedom. You're against a woman's freedom to control her bodily autonomy. You are against the right of people to love each other. And so you just use quotes and names, and you just care about green M&Ms and the legs of green M&Ms. And what's the new one that you care about? The new one that you're all focused on is whether or not there are sex toys in department stores and the placement of whether there are sex toys in department stores. That's what you're all giving speeches about as the Republicans. I mean, completely, utterly insane, weird, and utterly deranged. I don't even know what you're talking about here. Long-seated swamp creatures and all of the evil plots and conspiracies against me. I mean, how deeply problematic, how deeply flawed, how dangerous you are, how disqualifying all of this should be. And the fact that I read what I just read, and the Republican Party, one of the major political parties in the United States of America, looks at what I just read right now and goes, you know what? That's someone who's a leader. That's somebody who should represent my political party. That's somebody who I would vote for. I mean, how utterly insane can you be that that's what a major American political party, the Republicans, stand for? That's why I also say time and time again, never call these people conservative. This is what conservative is right now. I'm not going to let them use that word conservative because what conservative now means that you're for insurrection. It means that you're an election denier. It means that you have to cheer on global pandemics or pretend that millions of deaths aren't real. That's what it's supposed to mean to be a conservative. Stop calling Republicans, stop calling people who engage in conduct like this conservative. They do not deserve that title at all. Trump goes on to say on Tuesday, by the way, I'm not reading for you all of the statements that he made. I'm just picking out a handful of them. If you want to go and look it out on your own, I wouldn't recommend that to you because you'll just go down a rabbit hole and drive yourself nuts. I'll do that work for you. Don't worry about it. But he posts dozens of more stuff in a day. Usually by noon, he's got 2 or 3 dozen posts that are just some of the most dangerous. He does these QAnon posts where he posts these photos of himself with big Qs on his shirt, things that say the storm is coming or I am the storm or where we go one, we go all. He actually posts the QAnon mantra, the QAnon slogan over and over again. Anyway, I digress. Here's what he says. He goes, I see where the unselect committee using the Democrats' favorite weapon, this is in caps, disinformation, is trying to make the case that I didn't really believe I won the election. This is a total lie. I never thought for even a moment that the presidential election of 2020 was not rigged and stolen, and my conviction became even stronger as time went by. Now, with all of the massive evidence that has come to light, including recently with the FBI's suppression of the election-changing information, I was 100% right. Again, what are you even talking about? You're just, again, more conspiracy. You lost over 70 cases in front of federal judges. You lost every case. Not only did you lose the case, but you lost the case so badly that your lawyers were either sanctioned or lost their legal license or have disciplinary proceedings against them that are pending or will be pending. That's how bad you actually lost all of lawsuits. By the way, in front of judges who you appointed. Many of the judges you lost in front of were judges who you appointed. Then you say, oh, it's the Democrats' favorite weapon, disinformation. This is just more projection. You are the number one purveyor of disinformation, utilizing all of the right-wing disinformation media networks out there, from Fox to OAN to Newsmax to all those disinformation hubs. I could go on and on and on. Well-funded disinformation hubs completely lying over and over and over again to the American people. And all of this is documented. And to combat that, you think that, hey, I'm just going to write these posts on my social media platform. I will try to trick all my gullible supporters into believing me, and into destroying our democracy. You're nothing short of the biggest traitor in the history of our country. The level of dangerousness that you present and pose to our country now, you are a clear and present threat to our democracy. You were a clear and present threat to our democracy. You will go down in history as the biggest traitor to have ever lived against the United States of America. We will make sure that you are held accountable. Go on to read some of your other posts that you make here. Here you go. In addition to everything else, our government, through the FBI, rigged the 2020 presidential election. That's where you're going. That the government, through the FBI, again, you appointed the FBI director. You appointed the FBI director, Christopher Wray. It was your appointee. I want to make that very, very clear. You appointed Christopher Wray, number one. Number two, you appointed Bill Barr. And now they're rhinos or they're Democrats because they don't go along with what you say. Your own appointees. Not only that, there are a number of other appointees there. These people worked for you. And simply because they don't believe, they weren't going to go along with what you said about, the bamboo from China mixed with the secret satellites from Italy, which dealt with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and somehow that changed the results of... No. Completely insane and dangerous conspiracy theories. Here you go on again, attacking special counsel Jack Smith. You write, I assume that special prosecutor, you put that in quotes again because that's what you do. You mock the prosecutor who's investigating your crimes, again, which could be a further act of obstruction. I assume that special prosecutor Jack Smith, a disciple of Obama, Biden, Eric Holder, Lisa Monaco, Andrew Weissman, and all other Trump haters, is looking to prosecute the fraudulent but highly successful effort made by the FBI in illegally changing the results of the 2020 presidential election. Again, what are you talking about? What in the world are you talking about? I can't wait for all of these posts to become exhibits at the trial against Donald Trump, to go through these one by one, to read them one by one as Donald Trump sits there in the defendant's chair. Just thinking about that, thinking about justice coming, thinking about these insane conspiracy theory-laden posts being read in a courtroom with justice being served is something that I'm looking forward to. I don't know about you. This is then you quoting yourself, because that's what you do. You have conversations with yourself. Trump goes, worse now than ever in the history of our country. Talking to himself. He's engaged in a communication with himself. And what he's responding to is him saying, and I talked about this in the previous day, I made one of these videos, where he goes, our country is sick inside, very much like a person dying of cancer. The crooked FBI, the so-called Department of Justice and Intelligence, all parts of the Democrat Party and system, is the cancer. These weaponized thugs and tyrants must be dealt with, or our once great and beautiful country will die. And let's be clear what he's calling for there. He's calling for another insurrection. When he's saying that these weaponized thugs and tyrants must be dealt with, let's be very clear what he means. He's trying to dehumanize Democrats, people he calls rhinos, anyone who isn't a part of his sick and deranged and disgusting cult, and then say they need to be dealt with. He's sending a message to his cult followers to attack and engage in violence. There's no other way possibly to read that. And then you respond to yourself and say, worse now than ever in the history of our country. Here's the next post that he makes, and the last one that I'll read for you right now. He goes, The FBI and Twitter colluded to elect Joe Biden. Let me pause for a second. The FBI and Twitter colluded? Twitter colluded with the FBI to elect Joe. What are you talking about? And then he quotes Jesse Waters there from Fox, and he goes, in other words, the 2020 presidential election was rigged and stolen. He puts that in caps. It all began a long time ago. They, caps, spied on my campaign and tried to, quote, rig the 2016 election, but failed. Remember, our government is doing this, not a person or party. What should be done about such a terrible thing? Or should we let someone who was elected by cheating and fraud stay in office and continue to destroy our government? Let's be clear what he is calling for there. Let's be clear and call out the threat here by Donald Trump. What he is saying is that the democratically elected President Joe Biden, the person who legitimately won, should be toppled, should be overthrown through another violent insurrection. This statement right here, Donald Trump is calling for another violent insurrection. Lots of all the other statements, he's doing the same thing too. He's saying what should be done about, remember, he's speaking to his violent cult followers who read these things. And he's asking them, what should be done about such a terrible thing? Or should we let someone who is elected by cheating and fraud stay in office and continue to destroy our government? I can't emphasize enough, not just what a traitor it is, not just how disgusting it is to read this, but the reason I go over and we talk about this is because we need to be clear and call out what this issue is. And I know that the large media networks that do the both sides journalism, I know they like to pretend that this doesn't exist. Then on the right-wing media and the right-wing echo chambers, they're cool with this. But the media is not calling this conduct out. The media is not calling this behavior out. They cover it up. They act like it doesn't happen, like this doesn't exist. Like we have a former president who is calling for another insurrection. We have a president who's making a call to his dangerous and violent supporters to overthrow our government. And it's not even going to get mentioned anywhere other than here on the MeidasTouch network. And so I take this responsibility deeply seriously. I mean, it's really, I don't know how you feel. When I read this, this is sad. This is sad how it's come to this. Because we're not in a place anymore where we're talking about, okay, how do we make sure our education is the best? Democrats are talking about it. How do we make sure our health care is the best? How do we lower prescription drug prices? Heck, did you even know that this week there was a vote to raise the minimum wage? All of the Democrats voted in favor of it. All but 2 or 3 of Republicans voted against it. I want you to think about that, because the people who are out there, the right-wingers, the MAGA extremists, people who still go to these rallies, they could benefit from a raise of their minimum wage. They could benefit from lowering prescription drug prices. Yet, what's MAGA talking to them about? Pronouns. They're angry about pronouns, and that's all they want to talk about. And green M&Ms or whatever the sex toys at department stores, whatever the right wing's talking about right now. Democrats are talking about all these issues. And you got the leader of the cult talking about toppling our government. Toppling our government. That's what he's talking. We have someone who was a former president who's out there right now talking about violently overthrowing our government again, and no one's covering it. Feels like no one's covering it but here. That's why we're going to call it out each and every time, and not just call it out, but speak to you and speak to all the American people about what it is that Democrats are doing. Look, I'm not a Democrat because I like the donkey logo. I'm not a Democrat because I'm part of that team. They're the only adults in the room right now actually talking about issues. And I may disagree with Democrats on a lot of issues, but my disagreement is often in degree of how a policy should be implemented versus the fact that the Republicans want to overthrow a democracy. I mean, Democrats are talking about, how do we make better education? How do we make education affordable for all? How do we deal with these issues? How do we focus on real freedoms? How do we make sure a woman has the freedom over her bodily autonomy? How do we make sure that people who love each other can love each other without MAGA extremist big government coming in and saying, you can't marry those people. You can't marry this person. You can't do that. It's horrific. That's horrific. And then you got this cult leader talking about, what are we going to do about it? What should be done about such a terrible thing? Are we just going to let him take over our country? Again, these are declarations of war that Donald Trump is making here, and we got to call it out each and every time on the MeidasTouch network. Hey, do me this favor. Hit the subscribe button right now. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers. Let's at least get to 850,000 by the end of December. Can we try to get there? Hit subscribe. It's free to subscribe. Pass these videos along and ask friends and family and people you know to subscribe. Show them these videos. Share these videos with them. It goes a long way. And in addition, please check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. We have great exclusive content you can only get at our Patreon site, but most importantly, help grow this independent media platform. We're not funded by any outside investors at all. 100% independent, 100% accountable to you, 100% crowdfunded. Check it out, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.